I'm Shahar Azani, and in the news, Israel under attack. As the situation escalates on the ground between Israel and the terrorist organization Hamas, anti-Israel demonstrators pour to the streets in front of Israel's Consulate General in New York. What is the view of the current situation from the Israeli government? What are the main challenges and what is being done? To address this question and more, I am pleased and privileged to have with us on JBS Itay Milner, spokesperson and consul for media affairs at Israel's Consulate General in New York. A few words about Itay. Prior to this position in New York, he served as Deputy Consul General in Chicago, as Deputy Ambassador in Serbia, and in his most recent position, he served as Deputy Director of the Civil Diplomacy Department at the Israeli Foreign Ministry in Jerusalem. Itay is a graduate of Tel Aviv University with degrees in Law and Business Studies, and he's registered to practice law by the Israeli Bar, thus making him a perfect defender of Israel. An experienced diplomat, Itay aims to strengthen Israel's relations with the media and with communities all across the consulate's jurisdiction. Itay, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
Thank you for having me, Shafam. I'm doing all right. The situation in Israel is a little bit different.
But before we touch on the situation, let me ask you, we all read and heard about the demonstration in front of the consulate yesterday. Can you tell us a little bit about what happened?
Okay, so yesterday we found out around morning time that there will be a protest outside the consulate in the afternoon, 5, and we were instructed by security because it was around the time that we are leaving and going closing the consulate. We were instructed by security to leave half an hour earlier, so we won't mix with the protest. And actually, I think that was a wise move to do because as footage flown out of those protests, we saw that there was a lot of physical conflicts, physical fights between protesters from both sides. And I actually received a terrible video last night of some pro-Palestinian protests chasing someone. I don't know even if it was a pro-Israel protest, chasing him up until 3rd Avenue, and he's bleeding from his face. So obviously it was a very violent crowd.
Very violent. Did they try to break into the building, Itay?
No, they did not try to break into the building, and I don't think they can. We have a very strong security force here. But it's bad enough that there are so many of them, and they are disrupting our work. And I think that's a good reason for our side to have a proper response.
A very good reason. Now, before we touch on the professional aspect of your position, let me ask you, how is the family doing in Israel? And how is it for you personally to be here in New York while everything is taking place as we are seeing on the news in Israel?
So it's not easy to be here and hearing the news from Israel, especially when I know my family had a very hard night. Running into the safe room, mamad as we call it in Israel, a couple of times, actually a few times during the night. I called them to see how they're doing, and I spoke with my sisters, and I heard my nephews and niece crying in the background, and it's terrible. And it's little kids that just went back to school 2 weeks ago after a very long time that they stayed at home because of COVID. And now they're back home again, and even in worse conditions that they need to escape to the safe room every couple of hours. Which, by the way, I don't know if you know, but every house in Israel has one, and it doesn't matter if you live in a village or you live in the middle of Tel Aviv. Every house has a safe room. It's sort of a shelter, and it's the first time in their life that they had to use it. My nephews, and I don't think it's an experience that a child should have.
Yep, I completely agree with you. I want to ask you, many of our viewers are wondering, what's the reason for this escalation? The fingers are pointing at the dispute in Sheikh Jarrah in Jerusalem. Some people are claiming that it was the Israeli incursion into Temple Mount. Can you clarify a little bit the situation for our viewers so that they understand what exactly happened?
So we knew that this is the 10th time. We knew that every year in May, it's a tense time because the Palestinians have their annual Nakba Day, and usually Ramadan is around that time. I mean, it is this year, and it's Jerusalem Day, and there's a lot of events that put pressure, and it's sort of like a pressure cooker in Jerusalem. But the difference is this year, and that's why it's escalated so fast, is that this year Hamas had an interest to fuel the conflict. Hamas planned to win the election, the Palestinian election that was supposed to take place in May 22nd, next week. And Abbas, he knew that there's a very good chance that he's going to lose. In this election, Hamas was running under one ticket. You can vote for Hamas party, or if you want to vote for the Fatah party, you had 26 different tickets, 26 different parties running under affiliation with Fatah. So it was a sure thing that Hamas would win, and Abbas decided to postpone the election. Hamas, of course, they can't do anything in the West Bank because they are not part of the regime there. So the easiest way for them to gain support in public opinion is by making sure that they are perceived by the Palestinians as the defender of the Palestinian people, and more importantly, the defender of Jerusalem. So it was very clear that they're going to try to build the pressure. And they did it in Sheikh Jarrah in Eastern Jerusalem, which, as you may have heard, there is a property dispute over there. 6 families were ordered to be evacuated from their houses because it belonged to Jewish citizens before 48, but this was not even complete yet. It was supposed to go to court. The court postponed it. So it wasn't the real reason why this whole thing erupted. The real reason is because Hamas had an interest to build pressure. They did it there. They did it in Temple Mount, and they achieved what they wanted.
So let me just make that point because you referenced it quickly. The situation in Sheikh Jarrah is basically a real estate legal battle that's taking place between the residents and the owners. And when you're saying they were ordered to evict the place, that was not an order on behalf of the Israeli government, but rather a court proceeding that ordered them to evacuate the place. And as you said, the process was ongoing in the court. And this was all but an excuse for Hamas. There wasn't anything happening in Gaza before that kind of caused that escalation, right? This was a move that Hamas chose to take at that time out of their own free will.
Yes, you are exactly right. Thank you. There's all the time reasons to build pressure in Jerusalem and the West Bank. You just need to pick the one that you want to use. And Hamas picked that thing in Sheikh Jarrah, and also the Temple Mount Ramadan prayers. And you're right. It wasn't even something that the Israeli government was the one behind it. It was the Israeli court. And the Israeli court actually postponed it. So there was no real reason for that. And the best evidence, the best proof that Hamas really wanted this conflict is by its own people. I mean, if you listen to the press release that they had and things that they did online and things that their leaders said, for the first time, I think in 6 years, they had their arch-terrorist, Muhammad Def, releasing a statement telling a sound statement that you can listen to, calling to everyone to go to Al-Aqsa and threatening Israel that if they will prevent it from them, Hamas will retaliate. Now, there's a reason why they did it. They did it because they want to have the excuse to start a military conflict, military confrontation. And I think that what we saw this time is that Hamas, starting from day one, to hit Israel the hardest they can. If they're starting on the first day with launching rockets towards Jerusalem, something that in previous conflicts they did only maybe in the last day, or maybe as things went on, it means that they really wanted this confrontation with Israel.
And the fact is, right now on the ground, you're mentioning Mohammed Deif. Mohammed Deif, in the collective memory of Israelis, and I think it's important also to mention it to the viewers who are watching our interview now, Mohammed Deif is, as an arch terrorist, is also the engineer who was in the 90s behind many of Hamas, and also beginning of the 2000s, behind Hamas's many suicide bombings against innocent Israelis. I mean, he's had experience, both himself and Hamas, and people, I think it's worthwhile to remember that, you know, what Hamas's nature is and who Mohammed Deif is. And you also mentioned the fact that this was a statement made vocally rather than verbally, rather than just being on camera, and there was a reason for it, right? He's one of the top on the top of Israel's most wanted list.
Yeah, Mohammed Deif actually survived, I think, few attempts on his life. As rumor says, there's not a lot left of him, and there's a reason why he's never shown on video. But as we can hear now, we can actually still speak, and it can actually still damage and make a lot of bad influence on the Palestinian people. And I think the story is, as I mentioned at the beginning, is the election in the PA. When Hamas saw that they cannot compete in the election, and the only way for it to gain support and gain strength in the West Bank is by creating a conflict, he did exactly that. And I think that Abbas in the PA did a very big mistake. He thought that he can blame Israel for postponing the election by saying that it's Israel's fault because Israel did not allow the Palestinians to vote in Eastern Jerusalem. But what he actually did is he gave the opportunity to Hamas to be seen as the one who are taking care of Jerusalem, taking care of Palestinian interests, and he's going to also pay for that. It's not going to be only against Israel. Eventually, the fire will be also towards him.
Itay, it's amazing what you're saying, because for people who are listening to us, they get the impression that Israel is almost a pawn in this internal Palestinian dispute between the West Bank and Gaza.
Well, it's something that we see over and over in the past few years. Hamas and Fatah are the biggest enemies of each other. Israel is in the middle of it. There's every time one of these sides want to prove a point, they do it against Israel. And actually, I think that's also the solution for all of this. Eventually, the solution should be in the dialogue between those two sides.
That's incredible just to understand this. There's the complexity and yet the simplicity of the situation. I want to ask you about your work and what you're doing at the moment, because we're seeing campaigns of misinformation and disinformation, and yet you're depicting such a clear and quite honestly, a simple reality of what's happening right now on the ground, and a way to de-escalate the situation, which is right in front of us. The Hamas had a choice not to launch an attack on Israel. So what are you doing at the moment? What are your main challenges, and most importantly, how can our audience, how can people who want to stand up for what's right and for the truth, can be of assistance to you, Itay?
Yes, I want to refer to something you asked before. For a long time, when Hamas wanted to fuel the region, Israel was restraining itself from responding. We didn't respond when they sent far balloons, inflatable balloons. We didn't respond when they attacked two civilians in Israel, killing one. We didn't respond when they threw Molotov cocktails and rocks on cars in Jerusalem and Temple Mount. We really restrained ourselves because we knew that this is exactly what Hamas wants. And but when they launched rockets over Jerusalem, we knew that this is a red line that we cannot ignore, and they knew it as well. That proves that this is exactly what they want. And as for my work here, this is exactly my job here. I need to bring out the message that Israel is not responsible for this escalation, that Hamas single-handedly brought this situation to the place it is now. And what we do now is practicing our right to defend ourselves. Not our right to defend ourselves, our duty to defend ourselves.
Very true. And how can people keep in touch with what's happening, get the news from you, and what can we do? What can people do to spread the good word for Israel and be of assistance?
So I think, before I joined the ministry, many times I thought, okay, Israel is doing a very bad job in hasbara, of PR, because it always looks like the other side has the upper end. But when I joined the ministry, I found out something that I wasn't aware of, that as diplomats, we are dedicated to the truth, to the facts. We cannot pick our narrative as we believe in and just go and defend it in any way we can. We can't go on the news and say something that we didn't check 20 times before that it's 100% right. The other side is not committed that way. A lot of the news, breaking news that we get with the numbers of Palestinian casualties in Gaza, it's coming from Gaza, and they can say whatever they want, and they don't mind. They're not obligated to any kind of ethics or truth. And this is also true for a lot of the activates that on the online social media. They just posting things without checking, posting photos that are actually from a different year, posting videos that are without context. I'll give you an example. A few days ago, 2 days ago, when it all started, I was watching the news, and it was Jerusalem Day, and I saw those youth celebrating at the Kotel, and there was a fire in Al-Aqsa. It was a fire that in the news in Israel, they mentioned right away that it was caused by Palestinian protests that tried to launch fireworks towards Israel, and it's torched a tree and caused a fire. Now the Jews in the Kotel, they were celebrating regardless of that. They were celebrating because it's Jerusalem Day. Now I opened Twitter and I see all of those posts of people posting the same video and saying, "Look at those Jews in Israel torching Al-Aqsa and celebrating." Some of them, by the way, were Jewish, and saying it reminds me of the 1930s and what happened in Germany, without mentioning, and they know, without mentioning that this is actually caused by the Palestinian protest, torching the tree, without mentioning that the celebration at the Kotel is Jerusalem Day, without mentioning none of those. Now, I think that this is what you and the viewers and everyone can do. When you see something online that is untrue, and you know it's untrue, and you know it's disinformation, put the truth out there. Say what you think, say what you know, share what you know. It's very important that that we are outnumbered there, especially us as Israelis. There are much more people who are pro-Palestinians online. And I think it's important that everybody do his share and stand up for the truth.
And Itay, how can we, sources, like you said, there are so many out there and so many of them are false and propaganda. How can people follow, you and the Israeli Consulate and receive updates from you so that there is a verified source and answers to questions that people might have? Is there a way or anything that can be done?
Yes, we have a few different channels. We have a Twitter channel of Israel in New York. It's Israel NY. I have my own personal Twitter, Itay Milner. We have our Facebook. We're doing Clubhouse today. If you want to follow, Israel in New York. So we have many different platforms that we work. You can also go to our website, and you can also check the Israeli MFA website. Israel MFA on Facebook, Israel MFA on Twitter.
As you were speaking, and thank you very much for sharing, that's the hashtag ITAYMILNER to follow you. I just want to say that I couldn't help hearing the siren in the background, and it led me to think about what's happening in Israel, because people calling, New York are used to hearing sirens here from ambulances, and suddenly when we call Israel, we hear the siren from the other side. And that's quite a terrible feeling, isn't it, Itay?
It's terrible, and I'm hearing it firsthand from my family. It's not just the siren, it's also the fact that they cannot leave their home because they have to be all the time close to safe space. And after such a long time that we spent at home, and in Israel is finally out of this crisis very well. Again, we are back to it, and I think it's very sad. But you know what really breaks my heart, really from everything that goes on in Israel these days, what really breaks my heart is what we see in mixed cities like Lod, Haifa, Jaffa. We see that over the last night there were protests of young Arab youth burning cars, burning synagogues, burning police, and this is very sad because this is 20-something% of the country, and we have excellent relations, really. And the last year was a big breakthrough over COVID. We fought it together. There are now talks about building a coalition with the Arabs, and this is such a blow. And I believe and I hope this is just a few young unaffiliated troublemakers and not the community as a whole, because I think it's a great community. But it makes me very sad because these are brothers. Okay, it's not the Palestinians in the West Bank, in Gaza, that we don't have any expectations from. This is our neighbors, and I hope that we will come to our senses and go back to our very good coexistence.
Because, you know, I couldn't agree more, because at the end of the day, even post Gaza and post the rubble, Israel is going nowhere and the Jews are going nowhere. It's our home, it's our state, it's our country, it's our neighborhood. And past these situations, you know, people have to come to terms with the facts that when we have to live with each other. But I couldn't be more thankful to you, Itay, for taking the time off of your super busy schedule to be with us. And I hope to see you many more times on JBS and in general, and count on me as a follower.
Thank you. Thank you, Shahar.
And I'd like to take a moment and say thank you to all of you for watching. Stay safe, stay happy, stay healthy. I'd like to thank our director, Sloan Copeland, JBS's managing director, Dara Golob, our technical manager, Michael Paley, transmission manager, John McDevitt, and to our wonderful producer of In the News, Carol Lilienthal. For JBS, I'm Shahar Azani. Until next time, see you soon. Shalom and leitraot.